We first open CloudShell, and based on our credentials, we have access to the appropriate domains and resources so that we are secure in our cyber environment. We have multi-tenancy supports and can review different catalogs of clouds in our solution that are ready to go. Let's go ahead and go down to the Cyber Shield catalog and then pick the Cyber Blank Canvas that is actually a template that has predefined instructions on how to build our test bench range in this case. Once we open the blueprint, we see there are instructions and videos on how to get started. These are user-definable and easy to build for our admin automation engineers, fully supporting HTML5, embedding videos, and PowerPoints. Let's drop in a few apps which will configure and deploy some virtual machines in CypherPath to build our Ixia test bench. We will be using Virtual Breaking Point with its controller virtual machine and one virtual blade in our sample test bench. So I'll grab the Breaking Point controller, I'll grab a blade. We can then easily connect the two by just clicking the connection icon. We could then add a Linux VM, a Ubuntu one, for access to the CypherPath Breaking Point web portal. And in addition to that, we can add physical devices. We click on Resource and go look for particular resources. We might find some switches that we have, and maybe we'd like to test a particular switch. So I'm going to grab this Zone 0 physical switch, a Cisco switch, and then I can connect that up in a similar fashion. Rather than completing this particular template, I'm going to switch at this time to another template that's already configured and ready to reserve. Here you can see we added a firewall, renamed our workstation Ubuntu, added some storage, and connected up both of our ports from the Breaking Point blade to the Zone 0 switch. We can now reserve it, and this will set up and provision the environment. Once the blueprint template is finished, instructions are updated, and we've reserved it, the API will take over and create the resources in CypherPath and CloudShell to be used in our test bench or workflow activities. Once the sandbox is active, we can now see commands that are available in the resources to do workflow activities, and we can now open up the Breaking Point environment with a single click and doing more complex activities, such as opening its web interface, creating a new Breaking Point session, choosing and picking a test once it comes up, and we'll start that test that will do some traffic testing as well as security and strike testing against our switch, the device under test. So we'll click Test, open a recent test. Once the test starts, we'll come back to it in a little bit since it takes some time to get that test running. Now I'd like to switch over to this network diagram that shows a more complex environment, which is a full cyber exercise range. Here we might have hundreds or even more players involved, which makes management of the entire environment quite complex. Note that all the switches, servers, and clients are quite substantial and in different zones. If I switch back to our CloudShell environment and go back to our catalogs, I can bring up this particular environment, and we can see that all of the devices that were in our diagram are now here inside of our blueprint. Note the Zone 0 switch is here as well. Zone 2, 3, 4, firewalls, machines, quite a number of things are available here in this environment. as well as breaking point. What's interesting to see is that since we have hundreds of users, it might be confusing for certain users and players within this environment to have access to everything. They really should just have access to particular pieces of this infrastructure, and CloudShell supports all of that. If you notice out here in our Cyber Shield, we have other catalog blueprints available that represent pieces of the entire cyber range. For example, Zone 3 is just the PCs and Linux boxes connected to the Zone 3 switch. If I click on that, you can see that we have that exact environment with our Zone 3 switch connected to 5 Linux, 5 Windows 10, and 5 Windows 7 boxes ready to go. If we go back to our Cyber Protection Team blueprint of the entire thing, we can now reserve that, and then it will actually spin up the virtual pieces and CypherPath, and physical pieces will be made available as well. Note that there's a conflict because we had already used the Zone 0 switch in a previous blueprint sandbox, but since we're admin here, we'll go ahead and reserve it with conflicts. Normal users would have to wait and go to the next time slot so that conflicts are automatically resolved with both virtual and physical resources. Notice now that we have commands on each one of these particular items. So high-level controls and drivers and automation and workflow activities can be presented to users without the expertise of the devices. So here I can do all of my Cisco switch commands just by clicking them on the right-hand side in my command area. Notice that there's also a CypherPath cloud resource, and the cloud resource can also have a TQIC provided admin driver that can talk back to the CypherPath cloud in order to get us results and information about the cloud. This is done through our RESTful API interface, so we can actually get the list of resources, users, tenancies, clouds, and manage everything from inside of CloudShell as an admin. I can also just directly go into the software-defined infrastructure operating system pane of glass so that I can see what my results are, what's being used, how much memory is being used, and the entire environment. Notice also in some of the clouds here that the entire CloudShell server environment can also be in a cloud inside of CypherPath, making for easy deployment of CloudShell as well. We also have full status and information here on all of the usage and all the statistics that's going on within the entire virtualized system. So we can monitor that, and this is available also with a RESTful interface for full capacity automation and control. At this point, I can now probably go back to our breaking point session and see that our test actually failed because we had lots of strikes. So if I take a look at my attacks, we can see that we had quite a number of attacks out here that made it through. Some were blocked, but many did not. So I need to go back and analyze what happened at my switch and change the policies and information on it so that it does a better job in cyber protection. Lastly, all this information is captured inside of CloudShell in our Insight dashboards for business intelligence. So we can look at user information, we can look at inventory information, we can look at all of the different resources, physical and virtual, as well as automation tests and automation suites, controlling all of our physical and CypherPath virtual environment. That's it for a very short but hopefully informative demonstration of what is possible with our TQIC solution.